Love your enemies. Jesus says a lot to us about love, and he actually describes a lot of what that might mean. But later on in the history of the church, St. Thomas Aquinas, in the scholastic period, in that period of formulation of theology that still informs how we believe today, Aquinas had something serious to say about love, building on what Jesus has said. He said there are two things we must remember about love, two things that comprise what love actually is. Love is the desire for the good, for the person who is beloved. You desire for the person who has your focus that they know only good. And you desire unity with them, oneness. More of a philosophical approach than an emotional approach. It's something for us to keep in mind as we try to figure out what it is Jesus is calling us to. I'm not sure if I've told this story before. As I said this morning, it's hard when you've been someplace too long and you only have a certain number of stories. But some time ago, I would have said a couple of years ago, but as I was thinking about it this week, it's been 20 years since I ran a residence hall at the University of Notre Dame in Keenan Hall, and I lived with just under 300 undergraduate men, and we made house together. And one of the fellows who lived with us was a lacrosse player. Now, in the mythologies and the kind of typologies of the United States, a boy who plays lacrosse is from a fairly wealthy family. He grew up in Long Island or New Jersey. He went to a private school. He's a little arrogant. And it kind of fit. There's a fellow who had everything going for him. Nothing was wrong. His personality was a little big. His laugh was a little loud. And he filled a room when he stepped into it. And he was a nice enough fellow. I didn't really know him all that well. And then in his junior year, he moved off campus, so I saw him even less. And then sometime during that year, he and his friends were in their house when the door got kicked open. And in came 3 guys in masks carrying guns. And they robbed them. They took everything of value. And they belittled them. They made fun of them for their weakness. And quite shaken by the experience, they, the next morning, moved to a friend's house a couple blocks away. Didn't know quite what to do. They were in an apartment that felt safe. And the door got kicked in, and the same 3 men came in, waving guns. And this time they demeaned them, and they belittled them, and they made them feel completely bereft of any capacity to protect themselves. And it was horrible. Now I'm going to tell you 2 stories, 2 examples of love that come out of this. One was back at the original house. The neighbor woman was looking in the trunk of her son's car. He had just gotten his license. He was 16 years old. He had bought his own car. And there were things that weren't his. Stolen items that were immediately identifiable as being taken from these undergraduates. And in a great act of love, she called the police. Because for her, to desire the good for her son and his friends was to hold them accountable to what they had done. And it was a hard decision, and of course it was lauded by people who read about it in the newspapers. And then the boys pled guilty, and not much was heard about it, about the whole situation, for about a year. When one day I was walking across campus, and this boy was now a senior in his final year, And I just ran into him by chance, and I asked him how things were going, and this bigger-than-life human being very quietly said, "Oh, it's going a lot better now. I'm getting a lot of help still. I can't sleep through the night, and I need to have a light on. But we're working our way through it." And then I said, "So whatever happened?" He said, "It's interesting you should say. Tomorrow is the sentencing hearing for the boys." And I said, "Are you going?" And he said, "Oh, I have to, don't you think? Because however horrific it's been, I need the judge to know that they're just boys. And that though they have to have some degree of accountability, they have owned what they did, we can't destroy their lives for what happened to me. Another act of love, where somebody who was harmed and not over it still longed for, desired the good of another person, desired to recreate a oneness, a unity with him, just as the boy's mother had. For this boy and his friends actually knew the kids. They had played with them. And they wanted them to know what they did was wrong, but that they can move through it and that their lives can be better. Today we have Jesus telling us that we must love our enemies. We must be good to those who are bad to us. We must pray for those who hurt us. These are not the ways of the world. And we can ask, who could possibly do it? And we know from St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians that the heavenly man can do it, the one who lives in Christ. And we know that as we read in the reading from the first book of Samuel, when David had the opportunity to kill Saul, who was hunting him, but was his king, he said, "No, who am I to take the life of the anointed one?" Jesus is reminding us today that the anointed one isn't simply Saul anymore. The anointed one is every mother's child. And that each and every one of us has to look into our own hearts and see where we ourselves have been blessed and given grace and been renewed, and try to figure out how we turn that around and give it back even to those who hurt us, even to those who bring us harm. Ron Rolheiser, who spoke here back in the fall, has written several times about a billboard on the side of a crowded highway, one that crawls with traffic. And the billboard simply says, "You're not stuck in traffic. You are traffic." In our lives, we spend a lot of time thinking about the traffic around us, the harm around us, those who do us ill. And we have to see and look into our own hearts and see, where are we part of the problem? We're not the entirety of the problem. Where are we part of the problem? Where is it that we can let go? Where is it that we can look at ourselves and say, God has given us so much that it has been poured into our lap, a full measure pouring over. And we can now give this out to others. We know that the circle isn't simple. We're still being hurt. We're still being knocked down. At the same time, we're being called to give and to renew others. But what Jesus is calling us to isn't simply an ideal. It's the way of life each and every one of us must draw ever closer to, so that when we are filled with the joy of Christ, we can be that joy for one another. We can be that joy in our world.